tell me why you object to people from ethnic minority countries living here. What is the objection? How does it affect your life?
This is a white community. It always has been, and it always will be, hopefully.
So you are racist?
I'm not racist.
Quiet Riot.
Hello and welcome back to Quiet Riot Midnight Mass. I'm Alex Andreu. Why is Northern Ireland the only nation in the UK other than England where we are seeing significant demonstrations in the last couple of weeks? I'm lucky to be joined by the Member of Parliament for Belfast South and Midtown, a member of the Social Democratic and Labour Party, the lovely Claire Hanna. Claire, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Alex.
Thank you for taking time in your time off to talk to us. Another day of demonstrations in Belfast today. What's going on exactly?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose really the same, similar to what's going on in England, in that people are absorbing the same, or part of the same media ecosystem, you know, from the top line down, given that until 4 or 5 weeks ago, from the dispatch box and from number 10, practically, we were getting pretty radicalizing and dehumanizing messaging about immigration and about immigrants. And people are absorbing the same media and social media content and disinformation. And I suppose to the extent that dislocation, lack of opportunity, you know, pressure on public services is part of what's been going on, it's going on in spades here. And you'll be aware that 5 of the last 7 years, we haven't had a functioning Stormont executive. So decisions have built up. The health service is in a genuinely dreadful place, and housing waiting lists too. And then I suppose the specific factors here are, one, that there is a really no other way to put it than a ready-made pool of recreational rioters. You know, it's just it's a feature of politics here. I mean, even it's a neighbourhood that hasn't had a demonstration yet, but the village area of my constituency, which is half a mile from Sandy Row, which is where the worst of the attacks have happened, there were riots there 4 or 5 weeks ago for reasons that it was very difficult to discern. You know, skirmishes with the police. And then I suppose the big differentiating factor is paramilitaries, continuing presence of loyalists, primarily paramilitaries and paramilitary adjacent people who are, I suppose, just whose mileage is in division and conflict, and the same people who really whipped things up over the post-Brexit arrangements, names you'll probably be familiar with, Alex, as a veteran of that issue, who just specialise in making sections of the population feel hopeless, feel demoralised, and feel like they are always losing. They have been present in the rhetoric, and particularly in the last week, kind of hyping this up, speaking out of both sides of their mouths, you know, in one tweet telling people not to get involved in violence, and then 10 tweets later telling them about all the terrible things immigrants are doing.
Yeah. And we had a conversation with Amanda Ferguson a couple of weeks ago, before all this madness started, to get a readout of the election in Northern Ireland. And one of the things that really struck me was that the TUV has some sort of deal with reform. They're sort of in an alliance with reform, and I was wondering whether that is one of the factors, because I've seen that the TUV have really been on the vanguard of this current spate of demonstrations.
Yeah, I mean, and it actually gets even weirder in that the TUV reform, and she's right, and TUV actually had the reform logo on all their election materials, their posters and their leaflets. Weirdly, Nigel Farage subsequently endorsed Ian Paisley, who you'll know, who was running against the TUV leader. Yes, running for the DUP against the TUV leader. Farage endorsed him despite his party's partnership, and in the shock result of the night here, Paisley lost his seat. I mean, I must say I celebrated that one, even though if it was a bit out of the frying pan into the fire in terms of the new MP for North Antrim. But yeah, that is part of it, and you're correct to say the kind of standard bearer, the leader of the TUV, Jim Allister, has been actually absent as far as I can see for the last week. He's a barrister. He's probably smart enough to know when you're actually visibly hyping things up and when you're not. But one of their counsellors, I had a debate with them on BBC Radio yesterday morning, who is very, very practiced at that art of dog whistle and saying two things at once. And as I say, people who are adjacent to that organisation, who aren't members but who are fellow travellers, who are part of the online, I suppose, encouragement. And that extends, by the way, to one of the three daily newspapers here that has kind of become the house magazine for that type of politics. You know, and as I say, you can't. It's obviously a totally different issue, but the same actors are those who were hyping up both fear around the post-Brexit trading. I mean, obviously huge Brexit champions to a man, all of them, and it is all men. But those same people, as I say, involved in commentary on this. And in that one line that has stayed with me for years, it was in 2021, and there was disorder around, what became the Windsor Protocol. Very much switched on and off disorder, by the way. I've been around here long enough to know sort of the anatomy of a riot, and these were ones, they were photo opportunities, they happened like that. They'd bring young kids onto the street and 15 minutes later a bus would be burning. It was done to kind of get headlines. But a young lad who I've subsequently met, actually he's a constituent of mine and he's not a bad kid at all, but he gave an interview to the BBC at one of them and he said, I don't really know what the protocol is, but my leaders keep telling me I'm losing. And really that's where a lot of particularly loyalist and unionist young people are at the moment. So look, those are the factors. Those are the factors, I suppose, about why it's here. I mean, some of these are kind of Farage and Robinson fanboys and kind of are almost advertising to be picked up on the grifter circuit. To get a shot or a slot at GB News. The same people that are hyping this up. So that's why I think. I mean, it's kind of mortifying that it doesn't happen in Scotland and Wales and it is here. But as I say, there are people who just thrive on this kind of division, and you can see are folding in and have been folding in all of the tropes about, two-tier policing and all this. And it is worth saying that it just so happens the same parties, my own Social Democratic and Labour Party alliance, Sinn Féin, the Greens, who would tend to the anti-racist side and to the left generally in politics, have been actively pushing back against this. And I suppose that is a trigger for these same people who, if I said McDonald's, they'd say Burger King. Do you know what I mean? Just determined to oppose.
Quiet riot.
I mean, I find it really interesting that your sort of tradition of, rallies and demonstrations and that kind of thing means both that you appear as a people readier to go to the street, but you're also, I sense, slightly more disciplined about it. It feels to me like there's less chance of a lot of accidental flare-ups, that when things tip into violence, it's a deliberate decision rather than something that happened because a bunch of 100 people, in a northern town in England somewhere got drunk and decided to burn something.
I think so. That's a very, very accurate observation. You're right. There is generally a sense of things being turned off and turned on. And as yet, for example, there hasn't been any of the looting. I mean, the night is young, unfortunately, but I just was in the city centre this afternoon. There is a pathetically small far-right demonstration and probably a couple of thousand on the anti-racist side in Belfast city centre. But of course, it all adds to the tension. I appreciate that, but there haven't been the numbers. So you are correct to say that it is more controlled. Paramilitary people who tend to interpret these people are insistent that they aren't involved. And I must say, looking at some of the demonstrations and photos and videos, it kind of reminds me a wee bit of some of the anti-vax stuff, in that there isn't clear, you can't see that somebody's in charge, and you don't see all the usual faces. But the fact is, and certainly here in South Belfast, where I represent, for months, we have been fighting an action from paramilitaries. For months, they have been putting up particularly in working class unionist and loyalist neighbourhoods, really lots of posters and banners. It's clearly not an individual, hundreds of pounds worth of print going up, but with rhetoric that would make 1930s Germany blush, talking about the excrement of other countries and other communities, really disgusting language in neighbourhoods that have become increasingly diverse, and that has been the definite hand of paramilitarism, seeing an opportunity and hyping it up. So yeah, it isn't. There's been kind of obvious attempts to spark conflict. We haven't discussed the particularly weird thing that happened on Saturday, which was some known fascists came up from Dublin, a crowd called Kulak Says No, who have been involved in the damaging of properties being used to house asylum seekers in the Republic. In a really mind-bending thing, they came up last Saturday and heralded as some sort of cross-community progress, and marched briefly with both tricolours and Union Jacks. And then after wrecking the place, intimidating local business. And by the way, I mean, I don't know if you know the geography of South Belfast, kind of Lower Botanic and Sandy Row, that got the brunt of the violence on Saturday. I mean, it is a depressed area, but I tell you, all the regeneration that's going on there is from minority-owned businesses. They're the ones who put their money where their mouth is. They're people I've worked with for a long time to try and improve the public realm. Several of whom had their shops and premises destroyed last weekend. So after they did that, this kind of mashup of fascists repaired to a UDA paramilitary drinking hole. You'd almost have loved to be a fly on the wall. Basically people talking about defending our borders, and they'd probably get into a punch-up if they decided to discuss where those borders should be. Do you know what I mean? It's such a ludicrous...
Very strange bedfellows.
Very strange bedfellows,
strange
but a really good reminder that, the only thing they have in common really is that they're full of hate for anybody who isn't white. It just shows that it isn't about. I mean, if the Kulak Says No people who are all about defending the Irish people, and then they're going for pints with people convicted of murder of the Irish people, during the Troubles. So it is clear that it isn't about community, it isn't about patriotism, and it is also clear, again, knowing intimately the areas that are affected here and the purported reasons. When we are talking about regeneration, about housing, about none of these people that are on those protests or so-called protests are ever around when we're doing that work. But the people who are around are Rami and Mohammed, and the people whose shops and cafes have been burnt. They're people who are actively trying to raise the game here. So yeah, the differentiator, I suppose, between Northern Ireland and say Scotland and Wales is you can't look past the paramilitary and, as I say, what I would call paramilitary adjacent people, and the fact that it's cover to say that it's about housing and public services, but things have been particularly bad here, and we are very, very far away from the normal, I suppose, links between politics and delivery. So a lot of it is around political leadership and lack thereof.
It's sort of both hopeful and simultaneously depressing that it's almost a step forward in the classic sectarian divide, that communities from both north and south have come together in a more traditional sort of British sport of disliking brown people.
Yeah, I mean, it absolutely isn't. I know and again, they were held, and of course, anti-sectarian and non-sectarian movements here are, for example, the trade unions, and hundreds of us gathered at Stormont yesterday, which did have a special sitting, people of all faiths and none, and that's the genuine cross-community movement that gets stuff done here. That really was, I mean, that handful of fascists from Dublin. There was no such thing.
Claire, last time it looked to me, just from the pictures I was looking at, that it was set up as a sort of multi-enclosure thing at a crossroads, where different factions could basically go behind barriers and chant at each other. Is this, again, what's going on today?
Yeah, it is, although there is a much larger policing operation. And actually, for the first time I can remember, police have requested mutual aid from Scotland. There's officers from Scotland en route. They're expected to be kind of on the beat here, so to speak, by about Tuesday or Wednesday. There's an enormous police presence, and of course that's difficult for businesses as well, of all types. A lot of shops and stuff in the town have closed their doors early this afternoon, and as I say, there's a tension about the place. Last night I was in Botanic just with some of the minority owned businesses who are really, really jumpy, as you can imagine, really, really nervous, and different rumours circulating on social media about things that are going to happen. So yeah, today that separation was very, very developed. A lot of police Land Rovers, and you'll know police Land Rovers are still an everyday sight on the ground here. Separating, as I say, a very paltry far right demonstration with, like, again, some really weird placards, kind of protect our children. And you're like, are you the same guys who had 12-year-olds fighting with the police the other night? It's kind of, but it was last week, I suppose. I don't know if the police were caught unawares, but the problem started when there was a reasonable police presence in the city centre and a reasonable police presence at the Belfast Islamic Centre, which was the known target, far right material had said. And there was about a mile between those, about a mile of it. But the issue started when basically the far right protest of a couple of hundred people took a fairly meandering route, and the police kind of lost control of it a little bit. It split up and kind of wandered about and broke off to go and, try and attack one of the hotels where asylum seekers. It's worth saying that until very recently, I think South Belfast was, I'm given to understand, the second highest concentration, I suppose, of asylum seekers in the whole of the UK. South Belfast housed the second highest number of asylum seekers. That's in part because nearly all of the asylum seeker accommodation is in this constituency for a variety of reasons. One, because it has always been, it's easily the most diverse pocket of people on the island of Ireland. So there's a kind of a critical mass of services and so on. And I suppose it's seen as a relatively safe place for people of any background, and the community here has really stepped up to support people and to support people both who are stuck in hotels due to catastrophic failure of the Home Office to efficiently, process people's application. But the community in the main has really, really, wrapped themselves around people to the best, the extent that they can, with social and educational support. But that's probably why it's been focused on this constituency this week.
One last question before I let you go, and this is purely an educated guess on your part, but it will be more educated than my guess. We have seen a lot of very fast arresting, charging, going through the court process, sentencing over here, and that seems to have had quite a big effect on the riots this side of the sea. And I'm wondering, does the police service of Northern Ireland and the prosecution service over there, because of their experience with sectarian paramilitaries, are they more likely or less likely to be similarly aggressive in their arresting, charging, sentencing, etc.?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. I mean, first to say, I'm relatively liberal. You don't like to see people going into the justice system, if it can be avoided, particularly younger people. But it is very, very important that consequences are visible, and this needs a really robust policing and justice response. And I think it has, definitely. I'd say that has been a big factor in England, seeing the sentences. So it was a wee bit of a slow start. There was a couple of nights where there weren't any arrests, and I think that didn't instill confidence in people. But I think a good dozen people were picked up last night, which I think is encouraging. Hopefully some of the more, ringleadery people. We had some experience of this in 2011, what's known as the flag protest. Again, the same characters, Alex, the same individuals at the middle of this, were long story short, Belfast City Council, of which I was a member at the time, voted to fly the flag instead of 365 days a year over public buildings. It voted to fly it the same amount as Buckingham Palace did, so on designated days and around 20 days a year, and a group. So it was good enough. It's good enough for the royals, but it wasn't good enough for kind of angry elements of loyalism here. But there was weeks of spread out protests in violence and intimidation. And at the start, the then Chief Constable tried to do a sort of a least worst option approach to policing. I'll let it fizzle out, and it didn't fizzle out. Instead, it went on for weeks and weeks and weeks, and it really killed off a lot of businesses, that just because people avoided, those parts of the town. And quite quickly, when they picked it up and people went into court and got big sentences, it stopped, because people were like, well, hang on, this might have been good fun, basically, for teenage boys to get involved in. But once it got really serious, that was really what sharply ended the protest. So yeah, I think there have been, about 12 people charged, maybe a few more than that, arrested, and hopefully that has an effect. As I say, as we speak, there is a small, and I've come home, again, I understand entirely the motivation to demonstrate and to express your revulsion at the racism and to stand up for your mates, basically, who are being intimidated. But that's the danger that, almost it's hard to disperse, a big crowd on one side and a small crowd. A little bit like what you saw in Walthamstow the other night, a sort of a few have a go lads behind police lines. So yeah, hopefully that is it. I don't know what's going to happen over the next few days. I do know, as I say, there's a big policing operation, including mutual aid from Scotland, to try and get a handle on it. We know that doesn't make it go away, and there are people who have decided that they're the aggrieved party here, and there are people, particularly migrant and minority ethnic people, who I just know, just as I say, people I know, home friends, people I'd come into contact as an MP, or who are really terrified. I spoke to somebody 2 days ago who said that they were sitting in the house with the lights off, the other night. That really shocked me to my core that was happening in 2024, because they're just so worried, and the violence seems so random, and you just don't know whether or not they stay here and whether or not they feel safe, I suppose, going forward. That's what means it doesn't go away, but hopefully that's the end of the kind of very visible graphic part of it.
Claire, just to put a timestamp on this, because obviously events develop very, very quickly in these situations. So
Sure.
We're recording on Friday evening about 7:00.
Yeah.
At this point, that's how it looks, basically.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for joining us. I hope it fizzles out without incidents. And please stay safe yourself personally.
Same. Thanks for the interest, Alex. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. And that's it for today's mini episode. As always, thank you for giving us your time, and hope you found this useful. Quiet Riot is an audio production by Cooler Heads with Naomi Smith, Alexandra and Kenny Campbell. Music by Mariana Sangita, artwork by Simona Canello. Quiet Riot is a co-production with Soundstone Global.
Quiet.